My former colleague, Rural Kevin by chumpydiplodocus. I worked at a school in China for 3 years, and 1 year Kevin was hired. He was from a very rural village in Ireland and had previously worked as a labourer. He claimed he had lived in London and was used to the big city. Absolutely no mental health issues, just one of nature's innocence. Sorry in advance if my formatting sucks, but man, it was a long year with him. If we had an unusual surname that students might struggle with, we usually went by a nickname. My surname sounds a bit like coffee, for instance, so I was Miss Coffee. Kevin's nickname? Mr. Hearty. He aggressively decided to mispronounce every Chinese word, even when he was corrected. Guangzhou, Jiwangzhou, became Guangzhou. When 2 of my friends started dating, he pulled the guy to one side and asked if he was okay with dating a girl who couldn't cook. When the boy from this couple had a bad stomach, his GF advised him just to eat some plain crackers. I joked that she banned him from tasty food. Kevin overheard and started shouting he should dump her. When I was broke, he suggested I commit benefit fraud. Yeah, just sign on for unemployment in the UK and collect the checks. Turns out he'd been doing this between Ireland and London for years, and insisted I was wrong when I said it was illegal. One of our friends told a low-key racist joke, "What do you call a good Indian footballer? Asif." Okay, not funny, but clearly a connection between setup and punchline. Kevin found this hilarious and laughed for literally enough minutes, then made his own version. "What do you call a girl who's good at football? Asif." We then realized he did not understand how jokes were made. His chat-up line was to offer Chinese girls apples while aggressively mispronouncing apple. He once wore a onesie to work and didn't get why we were laughing. He threw out his passport mistaking it for a notebook the day before his holiday. He may or may not have a criminal record for stealing a tractor from his village. He was arrested for stealing a Christmas tree from KFC.
Religious Studies with Kevin and Kevin by squitchtweak. This subreddit reminded me of my school days. My RS class had a double act of Kevins. I shared a few classes with them, but for some reason this one brought out the most bizarre comments. Our teacher told us that Muslims store the Quran higher up than any other book in the house, as a mark of respect for the holy text. Kevin 1, but what if a really tall man came into the house? Teacher, it just has to be higher than other books, not higher than everything. Kevin 2, what if he was like a giant? Teacher, a giant is not a book. Kevin 1, sir, what about the ceiling? It can't be higher than the ceiling. The teacher gave up. I once overheard the Kevins banter with each other, which included this exchange. This is indespicable. It's not indespicable, it's undespicable. We sometimes did peer marking after an exam, so you'd go through the answers while marking another student's work. I marked Kevin's. Muslims fast during Ramadan for 2 reasons. The first reason is that Jesus went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and the second reason is I don't know. Yes, this bit bizarrely lacked plurals. At least he knew Jesus went into the desert for 40 days. It's not why Muslims fast in Ramadan, but hey, it looks like he learned something once about religion.
Mr.Certified Genius married Miss Kevin by YourQuirk. This Kevin isn't the sharpest spoon in the knife drawer. I had a friend who was literally a rocket scientist. Or almost. His education could have given him the option, but instead he opted for the world of high-end robotic engineering. He was a certified Mensa member. He was handsome, smart and quite charming. He could have gotten any sexy girl in the world. Yet, he had chosen Kevin. I had the privilege to experience this, admittedly gorgeously cute, Kevin firsthand when we enrolled in the same school at 19. Here are some of her more memorable feats. We are Swedes, so excuse my own linguistic shortcomings. Kevin shared 5 to 10 links on Facebook every day as she did not know how else to save articles, dieting tips and recipes. We took the same school bus every day, and along the way we passed a group of wind turbines. Twice a day, 5 days a week for 7 weeks. So came the fall's first really freezing cold morning. As we reached the wind turbines, Kevin commented, "Wow. Who think it's so hot that they turned on the big fans today?" Edit, she told me she thought it was the fans that made that part of the city so windy. It was the beach of an island in the middle of the Baltic Sea. First day of school we were introduced to a teacher who told us that he was born in South Africa. Kevin exclaimed that nah. Not buying that easy one. You can't be from that country because you are white. Apparently I was in on it too when I tried to explain the concept of colonialism. For the entire year she tried to crack the code of his real nationality. Kevin picked up stray words and concepts here and there from her boyfriend and used them without any real comprehension or understanding. Kevin did not believe that we will ever be able to recreate dinosaurs through science as their big bodies couldn't survive today's gravity. The few times she was trusted to do her own grocery shopping, she routinely had clerks go through each and every item in the cart, checking that there was no GMO products. As she did not understand the labels and she was afraid that she would become mutated if she ate genetically modified foods. She was worried about being bullied over it. She referred me to X-Men as a sort of prognostication of the dystopical bullying to come. My friend was a no-bullshit, leftist liberal democratic socialist. Kevin on the other hand voted conservative in the EU election as she didn't want men to stop being gentlemanly, buy flowers or become more feminine. A woman on YouTube had told her that was what the left wanted for us all some days before voting. In all other regards, she explained, she liked the other party better. This is just the ones I got on the top of my head. I'm sure there is more. I recently checked in on my friend. The couple are 2 years into their marriage and still going strong. I've always seen Kevin as the proof that there really are someone out there for everyone. Someone who with unconditional love can explain the world and blow our mind each and every day.
My father hired 2 Kevins as professional movers by RozoOronaro. When I was younger, we moved a few times for my father's care. Every time, it went really well, except this time. I was quite young. This story was told by my father years later. He and my mom had a whole bunch of things he needed to do before we moved and my father was pretty much at the last minute and so, for the first and last time, he had to hire last-minute movers for packing everything. 2 Major League Kevins arrived in their truck. I will refer them as Skinny Kevin and Fat Kevin. Skinny gets out of the truck to help Fat to park. While giving Fatty instructions, my father notices some strange tubes coming out of Skinny Kevin's sleeve. My father, curious as he is, asked Skinny what were they. He replied, "I got a kidney removed, these tubes are for my dialysis." Then Fat Kevin parked the car. When he came out, we could see how huge he really was. He was fat. Just climbing the 4 steps in our entrance was enough to exhaust him. Great, one Kevin got no kidney and the other had no cardio. But soon enough, you'll see they both have no brain. Packing up went well but unpacking was something. When we arrived at our new house, they were still unpacking. Not a big deal until we saw this. The lawnmower was in the living room, the fridge was in the entrance hall, and the washer was in one of the rooms. When my dad asked why the lawnmower was in the living room and not in the garage, Fat Kevin replied, "Well, you didn't put a tag saying where it needs to go." When my dad asked the same question for the fridge not in the kitchen, Skinny Kevin replied, "We didn't know where to put this, there was no tag." My dad was getting really angry until he saw our box of dishes laying in the living room. I guess he already knew the answer as to why they weren't in the kitchen. He took the box to bring it himself into the kitchen, but then he heard a crashing noise inside the box. We, in some way, had more dishes than when we left. My dad opened the box and saw all of our dishes were smashed inside the box. All our plates, broken in pieces. Now my dad was mad. He goes to the Kevins, "Why are all my dishes destroyed?" Fat Kevin, "Oh. That's a shame. We didn't know they were fragile." Dad, "It was written plates dishes on the box." Skinny Kevin, "Yes sure, but it wasn't specified that they were fragile." Dad, "So I can smash your truck's windshield no problem?" Fat Kevin, "Well no, it'll break." Dad, well, it should be written fragile on the windshield. That way, everyone will pay attention as to not break it. Skinny Kevin, no need, sir, everyone knows it's a windshield and to be careful on it. Dad, well, I'm pretty sure everyone knows that plates and dishes are fragile. I don't remember the rest of their conversation, but still we gave them a terrible review and we couldn't file a complaint to their boss since, well, Fat Kevin was the boss. Fat Kevin paid for a new set of dishes.
Kevina doesn't understand BC on a timeline by yo_oi_soja. Some time ago, a couple of my housemates moved out, and one of the new tenants sublet to Kevina. For context, we're on the east coast of the US. Everyone involved is college-educated, American-born, and in their mid/late 20s. To paint a picture, Kevina was a short, heavy gal with a Jersey Shore aesthetic and mannerisms and a very bubbly, outgoing personality. Kevina had some interesting gaps in her knowledge, like not knowing what sparrows were and never having heard of Mormons. Quirky but forgivable. One night, Kevina struck up a conversation with me and a fellow housemate. Kevina had apparently been raised Catholic and/or went to Catholic school, and years ago she had dumbfounded her history class with a question. If Jesus is God, then how can there be a BC? She never got an answer from that teacher, and she to this day was still confused. My housemate and I were similarly awestruck, and after gathering my thoughts, I realized that she had conflated the biblical myth of creation with the birth of Jesus. She didn't realize that the universe was older than 2,000-ish years old. Having always wanted to teach small children basic history, and having recently binge-watched PBS Eons and Crash Course World History, I spent the next 30 minutes providing a rough overview of history, from the alleged Big Bang 14 billion years ago to the alleged age of dinosaurs tens of millions of years ago to the rise of hominids and eventually civilization. Yes, things were happening before Jesus. In fact, almost all of history happened before Jesus. Even the most conservative creationists believe that. So that was interesting. I'd honestly feel a bit bad about posting this, but I'm still irked that she never paid our ISP and passed her fees along to me. Apparently she thought she could ignore their calls and mail without consequence. I guess she was kinda right.
Kevina the Temp Worker by MamieJoJackson. I was reminded of this Kevina recently, and thought I'd share. This makes two Kevinas I have personally worked with, and I feel blessed that I got to witness this one because holy shit, she was a marvel. As I did before, I'll hit this one with bullet points to really get to the good bits. Okay, here we go. Kevina thought a small, not baby, garter snake was an enormous, really weird worm. We told her it was a garter snake and asked if she'd never seen one, and she claimed she'd never seen a snake, because snakes aren't in the US. Not just a specific kind of snake, but literally any snake at all, not in the States. Kevina is a native of PA, BTW, and where we are, snakes are super common. Also, no, this is not Kevina the manager, there are just two people in the world now who don't know what /how/when/why snakes are. Kevina didn't understand that you can't just show up to shift work whenever you want to. She would routinely stroll in up to 2 hours after her start time, fail at logging in because she couldn't remember that password was her password, and would be reprimanded for it, only to leave after 2 hours to take a 2-hour lunch. Gotta hand it to her for reliably slacking off for whole 2-hour increments. Kevina was dating a black guy, thusly, Kevina thought she was also black. Kevina was white. Very much so. Kevina could not comprehend that there were towns and people living above this one main highway near the city she lived in. I told her I lived about 30 minutes north of that highway, and she just went glassy-eyed as we all watched her brain try to process this. The synapses couldn't carry the weight of a thought though, so she settled on insisting that I didn't know where I lived because no one lives up that far. No one. Kevina decided to go on vacation for a week or so and didn't tell anybody, not the temp agency, not our people, no one. She was amazed when she came back over a week later and discovered that she'd been fired. She said she didn't know she had to tell someone, she thought she could just go and come back. And now, the best one. Kevina found out that my husband is from Mexico, and so these infamous words, that are still cackled among us to this day, came forth from her face hole. Well, like, how do you talk to each other? Me, what do you mean? Like do we baby talk each other? No, I mean, like, how do you guys understand each other when you talk? Because he speaks Mexican? Me. K. Me, with grunts and hand gestures. K, oh, okay. God bless you, Kevina, wherever you are, you weird, lumpy potato of a person.
Economics. Kevin doesn't know what wage is by Acylion. I took an economics class with a Kevin and his girlfriend Kevina back in university. TL, drive, Kevin doesn't understand what wage is. Yeah. But let's start from the beginning. Kevin and Kevina's plan was to take the class together. Except they weren't assigned to the same tutorial group. Which meant that Kevina simply insisted on turning up to our group every week, instead of hers. While being marked absent in her actual tutorials. She insisted it was the same. It wasn't. Due to the tutorials having a weird schedule, with several students missing lunch to attend the class, the professor said we could bring food into the room. So long as it didn't make a mess or smell too much. Kevin and Kevina brought in fish and chips, bags of McDonald's fries, that sort of thing. Despite this being college, where folks are theoretically adults, Kevin and Kevina kept whispering to each other in class. All the time. To the point where our professor was rather irritably asking them on a regular basis to please be quiet. Bear in mind, this was a small group in a pretty cramped room. Now, at this point, I'm just figuring they're immature. Annoying, but just immature. Not truly Kevin territory, really. Until. Kevin, excuse me, Professor, what's wage? Professor, thinking he's asking for a definition. Wage is compensation or remuneration by an employer, to an employee, in exchange for work, labor or services. Kevin, no, I mean, what's wage? Professor, after a pause, she erases and rewrites the equation on the board. Wage is represented by the W here. Sorry if my handwriting isn't clear. Kevin, no. What's wage? Professor, tapping the whiteboard, okay. Wage is this axis on the graph, right here. Kevin, no, what's wage? Professor, There's a long pause. Kevin, oh, you mean, like, money? You know, like pay. Why didn't you just say so? Professor, stares at Kevin for a few seconds, her face twitching. Then she continues teaching, ignoring him. This was in England. Kevin wasn't a foreign student. Kevin was English. This wasn't the only weird question he asked, but it's the only one I can remember in any detail. Probably because of the look on our poor professor's face, and the fact she was trying so hard to do her job.
Kevin almost blows up my high school by bpleshek. This story is from my high school chemistry class. This would be 36 years ago. The Kevin in question was a stoner type. He would sniff paint thinner and glue in woodshop class and smoke joints out back between classes. He must not have been a total idiot because only the college prep students took chemistry I in the sophomore year at my school. The rest were in earth science. Anyway, one day the teacher was a little late after the bell and he went to the back of the room where the lab was and turned on one of the gas jets. Then he lit it with his lighter. Of course, many people in the class went back to watch what he was doing. It made a really cool-looking flame that shot out a couple of feet. From what I remember, the flame started about an inch from the nozzle with the pressure of the gas keeping it away from the nozzle. Then the flame started slowly inching millimetering is more like it, its way back toward the nozzle very slowly. I reached over and turned it off because I was afraid it would blow the whole damn school up. He thought it was funny. I don't remember who turned him in, but it was common for him to be sent out of class for stupid shit.
Kevin at a bagel shop. The most Kevin person I have ever worked with. By Adric_01. Several years ago, I was supervisor at a small bagel sandwich chain. I worked with a young, 16-17 years old, Kevin. He was a genuinely good-natured kid and I got my promotion to supervisor because of the way I went into it with his training amongst other things. Now not to toot my own horn but I was good at my job, and I trained him well. A lot of it didn't stick. Here are the Kevin-like things I remember. The most Kevin of moments, one night as we closed up shop, I had him do the mopping while I cashed out. He filled the mop cart, got a mop and proceeded to tip it over. He is a little upset over it, so I tell him it's not a big deal, everyone does it. I did it when I was new, and I ask him to clean it up. At this time, he is holding a mop, and there are 2 mops still hung up next to him. As I turn to head back to my duties, he asks me what should I mop this up with. I stopped and looked at him, and yay, he was serious. I told him any of the mops would be fine, so he says thanks, and hangs up the mop in his hand and grabs another one. My manager, who was not there that night, refused to believe me until she pulled up the security cameras and watched/listened. She laughed about as hard as I had ever seen her laugh. When training on the register, we sold bagels in ones, half dozen, and bakers dozens. The register had those options and the proper prices listed, and I showed him how to ring them up. Far more than once, he would ring up each bagel individually and could never figure out why the dollar amounts didn't match. 6 rung up by themselves cost more than a half dozen. We pulled him off of the register after 2 days. Baking, we did our bagels New York, I think, it's been about 6 years, style, which involves boiling them before baking. Gives them a nice sheen and a chewy crust. There is a great big steaming kettle right in front of the oven and beside the prep trays. He would not boil them if we were not there to remind him. Food, he was pretty okay in this regard, but would forget bagels in the toaster, forget what the customer had ordered multiple times, and give the wrong items, etc. He was a good-natured kid, as I said, and so my manager kept him on to try and give him a chance to improve himself. Couldn't believe someone was this dumb. He was there for about a month and a half before he left his resignation letter on the back desk. It was a folded piece of paper that he had typed out his letter on. There were no names anywhere on this piece of paper. Not his, not our manager's, nada. He decided he wanted to focus on his high school wrestling and just put the letter on the desk and left after his shift one day without telling anyone he was quitting and never came back.
Kevina hosts a holiday party by skynolongerblue. I work with a mic, who is useful but a raging tool. We also have a Kevina, who is interesting. She is a brilliant researcher and grant writer. She has been instrumental in obtaining a prized government funding agreement this last year, amongst other things. She also has a Ted Cruz level of understanding her fellow humans, covers her office in American flags, and is generally an odd duck. Because he sleeps in a coffin filled with rotting body parts, Mike insisted that Kevina host our holiday Christmas party. This party is usually the highlight of our year. It's a drunken festival of gifts, silly singing, ugly sweaters, and fun. We usually receive our present from the department as well, usually a nice pullover or hoodie that we can use throughout the year. It's great. Not this year. Mike gave Kevina a few $100s to spend, since spending money scares him more than garlic and sunlight. So, no fun stuff. Here's what Kevina spent it on to get our holly jolly on after a hard year. A fancy room downtown with not one, but 2 pianos. Ladies love pianos. Kevina cried when we walked in. We were not allowed to touch the pianos, not even the ladies. I guess Liberace draped his balls on them once or something. Speaking of which, Kevina bought tons of chocolate from the dollar store as a treat for all 5 of us females in lieu of a pullover or hoodie like the last few years. Ladies love chocolate. She screeched as she threw mints at us. No, Kevina, I am not a hotel pillow, keep that away from me. Kevina bought a bunch of bottles of cheap Aldi wine and enough cocoa powder to drown a fat German child in for us to drink. No hot water though. Or any water, really. Kevina's snacks for the party included a casket filled with stale wafer cookies, summer sausage she grabbed from another department, and a random sleeve of saltines. I think she robbed the food pantry. Tidings of comfort and joy, indeed. Kevina's party games included Uno, a pack of cards from a casino that was missing a couple of queens, and Scrabble. No one wanted to play. She suggested musical chairs with the pianos. We can't touch the pianos, Kevina. How about Mark hum and stop instead? How about no? We only had the room for 2 hours. We spent 30 minutes setting up, an hour awkwardly eating cookies and drinking cheap wine, and then 30 minutes of cleaning up. Mike sent us a long email about what a good job we did. Go count some rice, Mike.
Kevin thinks he's a criminal by Breen Daniel 7. When I was about 10, my parents had our kitchen refurbished and we couldn't cook or anything, so we went out to eat dinner at a local restaurant. While we were eating, my dad, a retired cop, gets a text from Kevin's dad, who was doing the work on our kitchen. His son, our resident Kevin, decided to play with my dad's old handcuffs that he used when on the force he found when cleaning up the back of the kitchen. My dad had no clue where the key was because this was one of his earlier pairs he used. We have to leave the restaurant and go home to cut Kevin out of the cuffs. Looking back on it, I would understand if he was a young kid trying to have fun, but he was in his 30s and he was helping renovate the kitchen. Every time my dad tells this story and makes me feel bad for Kevin's dad, who had to call his customers and tell them his son locked himself in handcuffs and couldn't get out.
Kevin's fiancée, her boyfriend, and her husband by Scream-and-Gobble. Kevin had a fiancée. This was not unusual, as Kevin had had many fiancées, a few of whom had even ended up married to him, albeit briefly. This particular fiancé had a live-in boyfriend, but this did not bother Kevin. In fact, he bragged that the boyfriend was jealous of him because he made more money. Kevin enjoyed rubbing this in his face by paying the fiancé's rent and other expenses. It did not seem to occur to Kevin that this meant he effectively paid the boyfriend's bills as well. Also, it should be noted that Kevin did not actually have a lot of money. However, through careful budgeting, which is to say not paying child support, living with /off relatives, and sacrificing such luxuries as car insurance, Kevin was able to have enough money for the lady du jour. His fiancée also had a husband, but he did not count because he was in prison. Kevin's fiancée wished to go visit her son, who was conveniently incarcerated at the same prison as her husband. Since neither she nor her boyfriend had a car, she begged Kevin to take her. It would mean an overnight trip, but she assured him there were friends in the prison city that they could stay with. It would also mean missing work, and without pay, because Kevin had no vacation time left. It would also mean putting miles on a car that had gone without maintenance, because paying the fiancé's expenses had, despite careful budgeting, run him a little short on money. Kevin said, "Sure, why not?" When Kevin picked his fiancée up, he discovered her boyfriend was going as well. To some men this would have been a deal breaker, but it's not every man who is willing to be engaged to a woman who has both a husband and a boyfriend. Kevin's standards were not high. He then discovered, after driving several hours to the prison city, that the friends with whom they were staying were in fact his fiancé's husband's family. Furthermore, while his fiancé's husbands had clearly expected and welcomed his fiancé's live-in boyfriend, they loudly questioned why Kevin had had to tag along. Kevin spent most of the visit in his car with the doors locked. At last, it came time to return home. Here, Kevin's car protested and finally flat out refused to make the return trip. Kevin's fiancée and her boyfriend were furious at Kevin. How dare he inconvenience them by making this long, out-of-state trip as a favor to them in such a heap of junk. His fiancé's husband's family grudgingly pointed him to a mechanic who diagnosed the issue, but Kevin didn't have the money to fix the problem. He called his most sensible relative, and left increasingly frantic pleas for help, but forgot that caller ID hadn't yet been invented, and simply saying, "I'm stranded, help," without saying where he was or how to reach him would only result in the relative coming home from work and finding a full message bank and calling the whole family trying to find out where he'd gone, only to learn that he hadn't told anyone, including the relatives he actually lived with. Eventually, Kevin reached someone on the fringes of his family and somehow convinced this person to wire him a loan. With his car fixed, Kevin finally made the only good decision he'd made that day, possibly the only good decision he'd made in the last few years. He jumped in his car and drove home alone, leaving his ex-fiancée and her boyfriend stranded.
Kevina, the corporate assistant by Tales from Tech Support. I work at a company that does hardware design and security verification. Basically, we test any hardware that processes payments or confidential data to see if it works well and is secure enough to get certified and put into use. This work requires very skilled personnel, which makes people like me expensive and hard to hire. Staffing is always an issue, especially as we have to travel a lot. To ease this problem, we have a pool of assistants that can do work for us, to free up our hours. They can book flights and hotels for us, do our administration, proofread reports, arrange any equipment or hardware we need, and basically any odd job that is work-related. The pool itself is mostly part-time staff and we get supported by a different person every time. Generally everything worked really well. One assistant recently left for another opportunity in the company and her replacement was the 22-year-old girl that was in a program for young adults that have trouble finding work. Her name was Kevina and well, she lasted about 3 weeks. She booked me on a cheap non-direct flight to Japan in economy because she wanted to use the difference between non-direct flight in economy and a direct flight in business class, standard, to get her own flight to Japan because it was only fair she'd go too. Direct flights in business class is standard as a lost day of work due to jet lag/fatigue is more expensive than a business class ticket. She booked me a hotel in Kyoto instead of Tokyo, because those are the same city in her eyes, just spelled differently. We had won a big contract, also thanks to multiple people in the pool of assistants for doing grunt work for weeks. My manager decided to splurge a little bit and treat the pool of assistants with some expensive high-quality sushi delivered to the office for lunch. Kevina could not fathom eating raw fish, so when delivered she threw it in the garbage, ruining it for everyone. In the hardware testing lab she was convinced that they had a deep fryers installed, and they were petty for keeping it in a separate locked room so she could not use them for lunch. She was told repeatedly that it was an acid bath to etch circuit boards, but would not believe it even when they showed her. Our assistants have access to our mailboxes to plan our calendars and answer other queries. They are not to respond to client communication. She would sometimes answer an email, copy the English in Google Translate and paste Korean text to a Japanese client. So it would be easier for them, and those retard letters are all the same anyway. She shift-deleted emails from my inbox, because she did not feel like reading them. She was fired shortly after the email incident came to light because of the severity of the situation.
I don't think that Kevin should work with animals by TuftyBall. Sorry for some broken English. I study animal healthcare and at my school we have a guy that we'll call Kevin. We have all been worried for the animals we have at our school since the day Kevin started studying animal healthcare. Kevin honestly believes that cats comes from dogs and that dogs comes from cats and gets mad if you try to correct him. He yelled at our teacher because the hamsters only had pellets and said that pellets ain't real food. The teacher had to sit down with Kevin and explain to him that pellets has all the nutrients that the hamster need. Kevin put his hands in the aquarium and when asked why he were chasing the fish around he said that he wants to pet them. Kevin thinks that if you scream at a dog it will automatically listen to you and follow your commands. Kevin believes that my 2 dogs are each other's parents. Kevin went into my dog's cage and tried to take them, and when confronted he said that they were his dogs. And most recently he said that he could not come to a group assignment due to a paper cut. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't trust Kevin around my animals.
Dear brother, Kevin dines at the Foodcourt by juniperelderberrypie. Short but so sweet. Rewind approx 10 years ago when my brother and I, 18-17 yo respectively, are shopping at a mall and decide we'd like something to eat from the food court. We both proceed to the counter of an AW, and I place my order first, pay and move to the side so my brother can order his food. Brother orders. Cashier, alright, that will be $1 total, and would you like it for here or to go? Brother looks at cashier, then looks around at the rest of the food court like for here or to go over there? Cashier, are you eating here or going elsewhere, so we know how to pack your food? Brother, still not getting it. No, we're going to eat at a table over there. Thanks though. Brother, I love you.
Kevin from the USA. Apologies to all my American friends. By Kookabanus. Another poster referring to a Kevin discussing Sweden reminded me of a visiting Kevin we had a few years ago, mid-90s. Kevin came over to Australia to visit a reenactment group event. I was witness to the following events. At the airport, a small group of us were there to meet the U.S. contingent. One of them was Kevin. He was a tall Californian type, as referred to by his own country folk, unsure if this was intended as an insult or not, with a loud voice and frankly somewhat obnoxious personality. As we exited the terminal, he asked why there were weird flags on the flagpoles. He was told those were the Australian flag. He asked why the national flag was not flying. We assured him that was the national flag. He said, "No, I mean the stars and stripes." He was very surprised to learn he was in a different country, and this took quite some explaining by both the locals and his own countrymen before he reluctantly accepted it. His counter-argument was, "Well, why are you speaking American then?" We had to explain the language we all used was English, the same as in the US. Kevin complained that everyone was driving on the wrong side of the road. Again, different country, remember? Kevin wanted to drive. Was firmly told no. Later in the holiday, Kevin hired a car so he could see the sights. He promptly stocked up on booze so he could make road cocktails. BTW, is this really a thing in the USA, or was it just Kevin? When he was informed that drink driving or even having open alcohol in the car was illegal, he just said, "No problem, I am really good at doing the tests." We pointed out that our police went straight to the breathalyzer without the need for a sobriety test. What? That's against my rights. No, Kevin, not in Australia. Different country, remember. The event he was here for was held over the Easter long weekend. This also coincided with Anzac Day, when our nation remembers those who fought in all conflicts. This means we usually observe a minute's silence and have a small ceremony. Kevin could not see why we would bother because it's not like it's Remembrance Day or anything. He almost was thumped by several of our ex-service personnel for that one. At a pub, Kevin ordered Bud and was deeply offended when the whole bar, including the barmaid, broke down laughing. Sorry US friends, but it is an Australian thing. Just like Foster's, no one drinks Budweiser here. Kevin did not grasp the concept of, look but don't touch / with our native wildlife. He constantly wanted to pick up or poke everything he saw. Couldn't accept that a tiny spider smaller than your little fingernail could easily kill you. Finally, the 3 weeks came to an end and Kevin was bundled back aboard his plane, but not before his friends actually apologized to us for having to put up with him.
My sister's friend, a female Kevin by CaffeineFueledLife. My sister had this friend growing up. Just the dizziest girl you'll ever meet. She once got lost in this tiny town, population 200. It had one road going through and 2 side roads. Her grandmother had to drive out there to show her how to get back to the highway going past town. She drove to school once and left her car running all day. The school day ended and she noticed it was still running and said, "Gee, I hope I didn't burn my engine up," and turned it off. She's in college now to become a psychiatrist.
Somewhere, somehow, someone didn't know what to do with Kevin, so they made him a manager. By SpicyDog. Kevin is a manager that oversees our office branch. And since this is a government facility, no matter how stupid and irresponsible he is, we will never, ever be rid of him. A few years ago, I'm trying to explain to Kevin the manager that I need my hours adjusted, because there are things I need to do before customers enter the building. Incomprehensibly, my job was created with hours from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., but building hours are 6:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Evidence of even more stunning logic is that one entry of the job duty list includes closing the lobby once window hours ended. I spent nearly 15 minutes on the phone explaining to Kevin that this cannot happen with the hours I currently have, but Kevin genuinely could not understand, no matter how slowly and simply I presented my case. Me, Mr. Kevin, you know that I clock out and leave at 4:30? That's what my hours are? Kevin, yes, I know that. Me, the hours for the building are 6:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. I'm not here to close and lock up, because I leave at 4:30. Kevin, Okay. Me, so you understand that I'm neither opening or closing the lobby, as my current job duties are listed, and neither am I getting anything accomplished with customers always present? Kevin, yes, but I still think you could close the lobby. Me, Mr. Kevin, I can't close the lobby. I leave at 4:30. Kevin, I want you to close the lobby before you leave. Me, so you want me to lock up at 4:30, even though lobby hours say it stays open until 5:30? Kevin, yes. The above conversation was repeated at least 3 times with varying wording, and a co-worker was standing by, growing increasingly alarmed by my distress, since by that point I'm trying not to cry with frustration. After the second go-around, in madness I visualized closing a government office an hour early every day, ignoring supervisor protests, crowing insanely. Mr. Kevin told me to do it. I finally just hung up the phone in defeat. The story does have a marginally happy ending, though. I ended up bypassing him by writing a letter to a regional manager detailing what I'm dealing with, and was eventually successful with my request for illogical hours.
Kevin helps at Hurricane Relief Center by Spastic-Traveler. Hurricane victims were lining up in a food distribution center, and volunteers were handing out food and words of comfort to these poor bedraggled people. In steps Kevin. He decides the best way to get this done is to just start throwing stuff at people. I kid you not. The other volunteers stopped him after he lobbed a bunch of paper towels at the bewildered people and was reaching for the canned goods.
No politics by HaudNomen. There are roughly 12 trillion political subreddits. This is not one of them. Nobody here cares how much you hate fascists, communists, Donald Trump, or any of the 20-odd Democratic nominees. If you see a political post, report it. If you make a political post, you're getting temp banned at the very least. And if you'd like me or some of the other mods to refer you to a more appropriate subreddit for your political ramblings, please hesitate to ask.